Good afternoon, class. Welcome back. It's John, and I indicated in class that from time to time, as we go through course content, if we're running short on a given day, I might choose to use this method of screencast as a way to sort of keep us caught up. So anyway, I'll just pick up where I left off, and we were talking, our objectives today were to look a little more closely at Margaret Ehrenberg's essay and her theories of how the gender relations between men and women were dramatically transformed throughout the Neolithic, the New Stone age, and particularly from the Mesolithic, the early part of the Neolithic era, where women were living in a pretty balanced, relative to men, they had social equality. The phenomenon of patriarchy or male rule had not yet really entered into social relations at that time in world history, actually prehistory. We're going to see that with the emergence of cities and civilizations, we're going to begin a process whereby patriarchy becomes something of a constant, not necessarily a constant element of social relations in the world, but very prevalent and quite common throughout the world. So that's one of our objectives, and then we're also going to look at the relationship between agriculture, specifically how settled agriculture has consequences for social organization. So with that, we spent some time today talking about what we mean by the terms Neolithic revolution and Neolithic period in history. Also the Mesolithic. We spent some time distinguishing between horticulture and agriculture. And so those of you who are in class had a chance to take down these notes and think through these terms and concepts with the class a little bit. What I want to spend my time here in the screencast discussing is another term that is useful to helping us understand some of the changes taking place in the world as a result of the world's increasing turn toward agriculture as its mode of production. So more on that. I'm going to try to be a stickler for the term and use the term agriculture, not horticulture, when I'm referring to a mode of production or a way of producing food that is truly agricultural in the sense of how we discuss that term today. So first off, let's expand our vocabulary a little bit. The phrase mode or modes of production is a term that historians and geographers like to use. And essentially, it's a phrase that describes how is it that a given society meets its daily needs of providing for itself or the members of society, the way in which they go about meeting their necessities in daily life. Now, that might not make a whole lot of sense, but if we look at some examples. So one example of a mode of production could be hunting and gathering, right? One of the ways that a society can meet its daily necessities is by going out and hunting for food. And of course, by hunting animals, one is not just providing food, they can also be providing fiber and clothing, in some ways maybe aspects of their shelter, such as in the case of the Plains tribes of North America that will use bison hides as part of their teepees and other portable shelters. So hunting and gathering is one mode of production. Some societies are arranged around that mode of production. Agriculture is another mode of production. When people move into one place, they settle down, they plant domesticated food stuff, they fence, enclose, and raise domesticated animals. This is a strategy or a way, a mode if you will, of producing the necessities that one or a society has the necessities that one needs to be able to continue to survive and thrive. In a more modern context, we might think of manufacturing as a mode of production. Factories in Pittsburgh produce steel, factories in Chicago produce meat and meat packing, factories in New York produce printed materials such as books, factories in Detroit, Michigan produce cars and automobiles, so on and so forth, and then those various manufactured items are traded from one place to the other such that people have their basic needs and maybe even some of their wants met. These are all different strategies that a society might employ. We've been talking thus far in class about hunting and gathering, and now today we're making the transition to an agricultural mode of production with a stop along the way with horticulture, which is a slightly different variation, slightly different strategy. Now, when geographers and historians talk about modes of production, the mode of production that a society chooses as its means or its strategy for meeting its needs has real consequences for other things as well. So the productive forces within a society, humans' labor, the technology or tools and instruments that humans use to maximize their labor, the natural resources or raw materials that humans will use their labor and their tools to transform into finished objects or maybe finished foods that they can then use to sustain themselves. These are all productive forces within a society. Similarly, the modes of production that a society chooses for itself often has consequences for its relations of production, right? Certain members of a society might have a stronger or maybe more significant role in a certain mode of production than other members of society. So what Ehrenberg was saying in her essay for today was, during a hunting and gathering mode of production that was true of the Paleolithic and early Neolithic eras, okay, before agriculture came firmly on the scene, hunting and gathering and horticulture existed side by side. And what Ehrenberg is saying is that women had a strong relationship to production, meaning their status within society was rather strong and significant because they were instrumental to the providing of food. By the end of the Neolithic era, men have been moved out of the hunting and gathering mode of production, and they have come in and sort of taken over large parts of the food growing. And this is also happening as horticulture is giving way to agriculture. Remember, agriculture is a more intense, more technological, there are greater tools, there are domesticated animals involved, the amount of land that's being cultivated tends to be larger, the overall productivity and yield tends to be greater in agriculture. But all of this comes with consequences for the society. In this case, according to Ehrenberg, women lose out on social standing while men gain social standing as the mode of production turns itself away from hunting, gathering, and horticulture and toward agriculture. Okay, so these are related things and important questions for historians to entertain. I mentioned in class that for the past 5,000 plus years of human history, women may well have experienced a decline in their social status. Prior to the emergence of cities and civilization, we think women may well have existed in a state of social equality with the men in their lives. We are now, of course, seeing women make considerable gains socially in the last 50 years, at least in our society. And so it's possible that we are now emerging from about a 5,000-year-long period of women having limited social status within many societies. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this, talked about her thesis, and essentially it is that after the Neolithic Revolution, women are still involved and important to the household production of food, and they are doing this through a mode of production we could describe as horticulture. By the late Neolithic, there is a larger shift to agriculture, and we have talked about what we mean by that term. So the question is, what has happened in between? Ehrenberg makes the statement that it has a lot to do with animals, and one of the ways that you can think about this is that in the early Neolithic, men were hunting animals, and that meant that they would go out and try to live off the land and harvest game for the benefit of the family, tribe, so on and so forth. But by the late Neolithic, the switch is not so much, when we get to agriculture, it's not so much about hunting animals, it's about domesticating animals. And as men take on this role of no longer hunting animals, but domesticating the animals, putting the animals to work as beasts of burden that can thereby generate more crops and a greater ability, greater yield from the lands that are being worked. This creates a situation where men will experience greater prestige, greater social standing in comparison with women. And that's the simple argument put forth by Ehrenberg, and she would use evidence from around the world today, noting that in horticultural societies that still exist in the world today, that women have a greater social status and greater social standing. So with that, I will, let me just say quickly introduce these three terms. As we turn our attention to civilization today and next week as we move into the course, I want you to note that along this Neolithic revolution and this turn from hunting and gathering, the Paleolithic way of life, to horticulture and then later agriculture, which are stages in this Neolithic revolution, we're going to see increasingly more societies turning to a sedentary nature or sedentarism. And what that means is they are now going to be located in one place, no longer nomadically roaming from one place to another to hunt and gather as the as the harvest calendar dictates. Now people will be settling into one place. As people settle into one place, this sedentarism, and they start turning their attentions first to horticulture, then toward agriculture, we're going to see an agricultural surplus develop. That surplus is a greater yield that allows people to not just provide for their own needs and necessities, but also provide for those of others. And when one person can grow more food, it frees up other people to be able to participate in society in a way that goes beyond growing food. So butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, all of these people who specialize, they practice that third word, specialization. So these three S's are all quite important, and they're going to bring about in their own subtle way, maybe not a very dramatic seeming way, but these are all three very important ingredients that help set the stage for civilization. Tomorrow in class we will take that concept further. Thank you.